Greetings, brethren, and happy Sabbath to all those in the United States and in United Kingdom. And for those of us down under, good evening. Yes, it is very significant that the coronation's on today, and it just coincided with the subject that I have. Because, Joseph is one of the most popular stories in the Bible, in both old and in the Old Testament, most well known. And as children, many of us would have been familiar with the story of Joseph and how it all panned out. So the purpose that I have in this message is to relate to you some of the things, some of the lessons that Joseph learned, and relate it to us, things so that we can learn from it ourselves in our growth and what's in store for us in the future. So most of the scriptures are going to be in Genesis in this case. So we start off in Genesis 37. Genesis 37, starting with verse 2. And Joseph, to start off with, he was the youngest of the first 11 children. Now, because there were 4 women involved, there wasn't a great age difference between them. But Joseph was the youngest of them, and he was the only one born from Rachel, who was the wife that Jacob loved the most. So it was a rather dysfunctional family, and there was the danger of favoritism being involved. So we just begin here with verse 2. This is the account of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, came tending the flock with his brothers. And he was a youth with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought to his father an evil report of them. And Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was a son of his old age. And he made him a tunic reaching to the soles of his feet. And there was a movie made of A Coat of Many Colors. Just continuing on. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him, where the jealousy was involved. And Joseph dreamed the dream and told it to his brothers, and they hated him still more. And he said to them, I pray you, hear this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the middle of the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood around and bowed down to my sheaves. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you have the rule over us? And they hated him still more for his dreams and for his words. So Joseph did have, he wasn't perfect. And the impression was that at this stage, he had a feeling of superiority over his brothers. Then, I had this dream. They're bowing down to me, so I'm going to rule over them. So therefore, I must be better than them. So perhaps the vanity got to his head a bit. And discretion would have been far more appropriate if he only told the dream to Jacob, his father, rather than his brothers, who add more fuel to the fire. Now in verse 9, he dreamed still another dream, and he told it to his brothers. And he said, behold, I have dreamed another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bow down to me. Well, imagine the reaction to this dream from his brothers. And he told his father as well, but his father did rebuke him. However, although his brothers were jealous of him, his father was mindful of the saying. In other words, he kept it in his mind. Said, "Oh, there must be some meaning. Must be some meaning here." And there's no doubt that Jacob spent far more time with Joseph than any of the other brothers. Why? Because he loved Rachel more than the others, and as a result of this, Joseph was his favorite son. So, go to verse 14 now, where Jacob said to Joseph, "Please go see whether it is well with your brothers and well with their flocks." So they moved their flocks to Shechem. "Bring me word again." And he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "I'm seeking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flock." And the man said, "They are gone from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" And Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now, two things. Why would they move their flock from Shechem to Dothan? And we can think of reasons. They want to make sure that Joseph wouldn't find them. They didn't want him spying on them. Another question is, who was the man who found him and knew that they were going to Dothan? Well, it's quite likely that it was an angel who gave him the directions to find his brothers. We're in verse 17. Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Okay, in verse 18, and they saw him afar off, even before he came near them. They conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, "Behold, this dreamer comes. Therefore come now, and let us kill him and throw him in some pit, and we will say some evil beast has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." And Reuben heard, and he delivered him out of the hands and said, "Let us not kill him." So at least Reuben had good intentions here. And they didn't all want him dead. Continuing on, Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but lay no hand upon him, in order to rescue him out of his hands and deliver him to his father again." So it came to pass when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his tunic, the tunic reaching to the soles of his feet and that was on him. Well, Joseph had no idea that there was this conspiracy against him. And they took him and threw him into a pit, and the pit was empty with no water in it. Well, the pit couldn't have been too deep to have hurt him too badly. However, it was too deep for him to climb out of by himself. And they sat down to eat bread. Well, how long Joseph was in the pit, we don't know. But they obviously, all the brothers would have talked about it among themselves, saying, "What are we going to do with him?" Though Reuben was not there. And they lifted their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, from their camels, bearing spices and balm and myrrh, to take them down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it? We should kill our brother and hide his blood." Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." His brothers hearkened. "Well, how's that for brotherly love? Don't kill him. Just sell him. Just sell him and sell him into slavery. That'll solve the problem." When then Ishmaelite traders passed by, and they drew up Joseph and took him out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben returned to the pit, so it was too late by the time Reuben came back. And behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And Reuben was in despair. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy, he is not there. And I, where shall I go?" So one sin leads to another, as we will see. They took Joseph's tunic and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the tunic in the blood. They took the tunic, reaching to the soles of his feet, and they brought it to their father. And they said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's coat or not? Not our brothers, but your sons." And he knew it. This is Jacob. So by this time, Reuben is in on the cover-up. And he knew it and said, "It is my son's tunic. An evil beast has eaten him." Joseph is without doubt torn in pieces. And Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I will go down into the grave, into my son's mourning." And his father wept for him. So they underestimated the extent, the input, how much this would damage Jacob and his feelings towards Joseph. The complete, they totally underestimated in the short term, and in the long term, as Jacob mourned Joseph for years. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, the chief of the executioners. Well, as bad as the situation was, it was a forerunner of what's going to happen to Joseph in the future. We now go to Genesis 39. In verse 2. This is under Potiphar. "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian." So Joseph was applying the skills that Jacob had taught him growing up. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hands. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him and made him overseer over his house, and he put him in charge of all that he had. Okay, and Joseph, by this time, he'd learned some lessons. We just want to go to Proverbs here. Proverbs chapter 3. Just read verses 11 to 13. "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights. Blessed is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gets understanding. So Joseph had learned some lessons, even in spite of the fact that he was in slavery. He was applying these lessons that he was learning from his father, applying them in this situation. In verse 5, it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house, over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the land, in the house, and in the field. And go back to Proverbs 11, verse 25. I wanted to get to that scripture as well. The soul who gives generously shall be made prosperous, and he who waters shall also be watered himself. So this was certainly applying to Joseph in the way that he was developing his skills. And we're going to, and also in Ephesians 2, verse 10, Ephesians 2, in verse 10 it says, we are his workmanship, being created in Christ Jesus under the good works that God ordained beforehand in order that we might walk in them. And the whole earth is going to be blessed by Jesus Christ. But the time came for Joseph to be tested. In 39, verse 7, 39, verse 7. And after these things, it came to pass that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, my master does not know what is in the house with me, and he has given me all that he has into my hand. There is none greater in this house than I. Neither has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Well, he certainly passes this first test with flying colours. But Potiphar's wife was persistent. And she spoke to Joseph day after day, and he did not listen to her to lie with her or to be with her. And it came to pass on a certain day that he came into the house to do his work. None of the men of the house were inside. And she caught him by his robe, saying, lie with me. And he left his robe in her hand and fled and got out of the house. Well, he did the right thing there. And it says, 1 Corinthians 6, verse 18, flee sexual immorality. So he did what was right. We go to verse 15. And when he heard, 14, verse 14, she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried aloud, he left his robe with me and fled and got out. Who do you think Potiphar was going to believe? A Hebrew slave or his wife? And yet Potiphar knew Joseph's character, was he entrusted him with all the things in his house that were his wife. But a charge of fornication would have brought death. But in this case, it wasn't death. Verse 20. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor inside of the king's prison. But when you're in this situation, when you're doing everything right, you're accused of fornication, put in prison, the temptation be then to throw in the towel. You would think, well, I'm doing everything right here. I've done the right thing, and they're accusing me of doing this. What's the use? What's the use of doing the right thing? But Joseph didn't give in. And as it said in verse 21, gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison gave all the prisoners in the prison to Joseph's hand. And whatever they did there was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not concern himself with anything under his hand because the Lord was with Joseph. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. And in Ecclesiastes 9 verse 10, it says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. And the account in chapter 40 is where we had dreams by two of the prisoners, one the king's cupbearer, and the other one was the chief baker. And Joseph asked them of the dreams. So in verse 8, he said to them, they said to him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpretation of it. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Now tell it to me. So he had the faith in God, and God was going to work this out. In verse 14, when they had told him their dreams, it was going to be in their favor. But remember me when it is well with you. And please show kindness to me and make mention of me to Pharaoh and bring me out of this place. So Joseph was planting a seed here, trying to get him out of prison. However, one lesson is here, and lesson for all us is that God does things in his time, when we want it to be done. Joseph wanted to be out of prison there and then. But, as we'll see, he had to wait another 2 years. And that was when Pharaoh had his dreams. So in chapter 41, and we'll pick it up in verse 14. Okay, Pharaoh had these two dreams, and he tried to have them interpreted by all the wise men that were there, the magicians. However, nobody was able to do that. It was then that the cupbearer remembered Joseph. That Joseph interpreted his. Well, that's when we go to verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurried him out of the prison, out of the dungeon, and he shaved and changed his clothing and came into Pharaoh. So when you're coming against the most powerful ruler in the land, and possibly the world at the time, you had to look presentable. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have dreamed a dream. None can interpret it. And I've heard it said about you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. Well, you think you'll be overwhelmed when you're confronted in front of the most powerful ruler of the land and possibly the world. Well, perhaps Joseph had a background training through from Potiphar and also other journeys that he's had even in the prison. And Joseph answered Pharaoh saying, "Not I, but God shall give you an answer favorable to Pharaoh." So he looked to God, in answering Pharaoh. Page was set. We go to verse 28 here, when he interprets the dream. This is the thing which God has spoken to Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he has shown to Pharaoh. Behold, there are coming 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt. And the plenty shall not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. So how would politicians handle it? Take modern politicians of the day. They take credit for, we've got the solution here. We've got the solution to this. If you elect me, I will do this. And then when the 7 years of plenty are over, resign, go on the pension, and let anybody else worry about the famine. Well, no, Joseph made the mission here in verse 32. Since the dream was repeated to Pharaoh and given twice, it is because the matter is established by God, and God will shortly bring it up. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh look for a man who is discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh act, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the fifth part of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up grain under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. That food shall be a store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, so that the land does not perish throughout famine. So Joseph offers solutions here, but he does not promote himself. And verse 37, the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh. So none of his people had any solutions. So it was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, in the eyes of his servant. And then Pharaoh appointed Joseph. Verse 39, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, no one is as discreet and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall obey your word. Only in the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, put it upon Joseph's hand, and dressed him fine linen robes, and put a gold chain around his neck. And Pharaoh, in verse 44, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without a word from you, no man shall lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath-Paneah. So in the margin it says, "God speaks, and he will answer." And he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, for his wife, and Joseph went over all the land of Egypt. So it was quite a change from being a slave in the prison to being governor of Egypt, second in charge over all the land of Egypt, the most powerful country on earth at the time. Now we come to 42, chapter 42. So the land had the 7 years of plenty, and just think of the promotion. Just compare that with what we are in this world. The majority of us don't have any significance to leaders of the world at all. Not many wise men are called. We're either in the graves, we're resurrected, or we are as nothing on the earth. Instantaneous resurrection of spirit beings with awesome responsibilities. And also the 7 years of plenty might be compared in some ways to millennium, where there's going to be righteous rule and there's going to be abundance. Something to think about there. In chapter 42, and we pick it up in verse 5. When the famine came, wasn't only in Egypt, it was over all the face of the earth, as it said in verse 56, chapter 41. In chapter 42, verse 5, so we'll see that the famine had reached the land of Canaan. The sons of Israel came to buy on those that came, for the famine was also in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was potentate over the land. He was the one selling to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves down before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brothers, and he knew them. Well, perhaps he was carnal. He may have thought, this is my chance. He may have come out. Remember me? I'm the one you sold into slavery. But now the ball's in the other court. You are going to be my slaves. But no, he didn't do that because Joseph knew that God had a purpose. He didn't exactly know what purpose was at the time, but it was being worked out. But remained a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them and said to them, where do you come from? So he didn't reveal himself, and they didn't recognize him because it had been 20 years since they last saw him. And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. Joseph knew his brothers, but they did not know him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land. And they said to him, no, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's son. We are honest men. Honest men. Your servants are not spies. Well, how honest were they? They had a history of sins, of many sins. And some of them were murder. And it was a sin to sell him into slavery in any case. So they were not as honest as they said. The place here, verse 9. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamt of them, and said to them, you are spies, you have come to see the nakedness from the land. And they said to him, no, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons, we are honest men, your servants are not. In verse 13 they said, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan, and behold, the youngest is this day without father, and one is no more. And Joseph said to them, it is as I spoke to you, saying you are spies. By this you shall be proved, as Pharaoh lives on, you shall not go forth from here unless your youngest brother comes here. In verse 18, and Joseph said to them the third day, do this and live and fear. Sorry, do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest, let one of your brothers be bound in your prison house. You go carry grain for the famine of your houses. But bring your youngest brother to me, and let your words be confirmed, be proved true, lest and you shall not die. And they did so. They confirmed on themselves. They were 3 days in the prison. They said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, talking about Joseph, in that they saw the anguish of his soul when he begged us, and we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. So their minds were not so far removed, and they remembered what they did to Joseph. And Reuben answered them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the youth? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is required at our hands. And in verse 23, as here, they did not know that Joseph could understand them, or the interpreter was used between them. And he turned from them and wept, and he returned to them again and talked to them. So the emotions were very high here. Joseph, he had to control his emotions to the best of, because he wanted to know whether they had changed from 3 years ago when they sold him into slavery. So he couldn't reveal himself. He couldn't open himself out for them at this stage. He took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Well, why Simeon? Because he was the most bloodthirsty. And it was quite likely, just remember Simeon and Levi at Shechem, the slaughter they did there. And also, it may well have been Simeon that made the suggestion to kill Joseph, bring him in the pit and selling him into slavery. Okay? So, in verse 25, and Joseph commanded the sacks to be filled with grain and returned their silver each into his sack to give them provision for the way, and so he did to them. They loaded their donkeys with grain and departed from there. And we come to verse 28, when they discovered the silver. And he said to his brothers, my silver has been put back here in my sack. And their hearts sank. And they each were afraid, saying to one another, what is this God has done to us? And so they went back to the land of Canaan, and they relayed the story to Jacob, their father. And this is the result of what Jacob, or how Jacob responded in verse 36. Jacob, their father, said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and you will take Benjamin. All these things are against me. And Reuben spoke to his father, saying, kill my 2 sons, if I do not bring him to you. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to you again. So there were fruits of repentance here. Jacob would not relent. He did not want Simeon to be taken down to Egypt. Then we come to the next chapter, 43. And verse 8. This is when the famine was still in its early stages, and they were running out of food again. They had to go down to Egypt again. And Judah said to Israel, his father, send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, so that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. You will require him of my hand. If I do not bring him to you and set him before you, I shall be a sinner against you all the days. So Judah is taking responsibility here. And Judah had his own trials in chapter 38, and had two of his own sons killed. In verse 16, so all back they went. Jacob finally agreed Judah to be responsible for Benjamin and allow them to go back to Egypt to purchase more grain. So verse 16, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of his house, bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready. The men shall dine with me at noon. And the men did as Joseph said. The man brought the men into Joseph's house. And the men were afraid. They were afraid of this because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, because of the silver that was returned in our sacks at the first time, we are brought in that he may seek something against us and fall upon us and take us to slaves in our gold. And we go down to verse 24. Then the men were brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water and washed their feet and gave fodder to their donkeys. And they made ready the presents for the coming of Joseph at noon, and they heard that they should eat bread there. They had to make themselves presentable, because they were going to be dining for the governor of the land. Quite a occasion for them. And when Joseph came home in verse 26, they brought him the presents in their hands into the house and bowed themselves to the earth. And he asked them to their welfare and said, is your father well? The old man of whom is, if he's still alive? Well, obviously Joseph yearned to see Jacob again. And they answered, your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive. And they bowed down their heads, fell before him. He lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? He said, God bless you, my son. Joseph made haste, for his heart yearned for his brother. And he sought a place to weep. He entered into his room there. So this was very emotional for Joseph to repeat control. And it does remind me of scripture in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. Where it says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound-mindedness. And Joseph in this scenario, in this situation, where he saw Benjamin for the first time in over 20 years, had to control himself to be of sound mind. In verse 31 of Genesis 43, he washed his face and went out and controlled himself and said, serve the food. Verse 33, and they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled at one another. So here we are in a completely unknown country, or the governor of the land. They were seated there in chronological order. And here they were before the governor of the land. while having a delicious fine meal. But their trials were to begin, or their big test was to begin. Come, we go to the next chapter, 44, where Joseph had everyone's sack filled with silver put into everyone's sack, and the silver cup put into Benjamin's sack. This was going to be the trial, the real trial. In chapter 44, verse 15, when they were brought back by the steward to Joseph's house. And Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that one like me can certainly divine?" And Judah said, "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your slaves, because we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found." So Judah at this stage realized that there was no way out of it. And Joseph said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, you go in peace to your father." So this is the test here. Joseph is waiting for what the response is going to be. And here we have from verse 18, we have the intercession from Judah. One of the most heartfelt intercession that you can imagine. And Judah realized that because there was no way out, he had to come all out with this intercession and lay his own life on the line, really. Okay, so we come to verse 33. From verse 18 right to the end of the chapter. In verse 33, he says, "And now, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a slave to my Lord, and let the boy go up with his brothers." He told him this whole scenario that his father, Jacob, would not survive the ordeal of Benjamin not being brought back. In verse 34, he says, "How shall I go up to my father and the boy is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that will befall my father?" Well, this was the moment Joseph was waiting for. And as a result of this, he couldn't control his emotions anymore. He caused everybody to go out, caused everybody to leave the room, and left himself there with his brothers. And in verse 3, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" And his brothers could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. They were terrified because of the history of 20 years before. But Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." They came near and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. These 2 years, the famine have been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be no ploughing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." So this is a physical salvation. The famine was so severe in all surrounding districts. And perhaps we may look at this as a type of spiritual salvation. Jesus Christ, by his death, the shedding of his blood, was a spiritual salvation for the whole world. Okay, and also the other thing to think about is I already mentioned this, the 7 years of plenty were a type of millennium. Verse 8, and now you did not send me here, but God, and he made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord over all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and do not wait. And ye shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your sons and your sons' sons and your flocks, your herd, and all that you have. And I will nourish you there, for there are still 5 years of famine, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. So can you imagine the family reunion time? Imagine the emotions. And we think of this in our own lives. Think of this in our own lives with loved ones, with family and loved ones that perhaps they have done wrong to us. But there will be a reunion. Well, I remember saying to my own mother once, a few months before she died, and she had a Protestant background, so she had no real understanding. But it gave her comfort when I said that when she wakes up from death, she will be in the greatest family reunion that she will ever experience. Now, in Genesis 46, an angel, Jacob, is spoken to in a dream, encouraging him to go into Egypt. In verse 3, he said, I am the God of your fathers. Do not fear to go down into Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation. I will go down with you into Egypt, and I will surely bring you up again. And Joseph himself shall put his hand over your eyes. And Jacob was actually in Egypt for 17 years. And incidentally, Joseph was 17 years old when he was taken from Jacob down into Egypt. And since Joseph was born in Haran, the land of Haran, he was only a few years in Canaan. So, chapter 48 was when Jacob gave Joseph's sons Ephraim and Manasseh promises. And chapter 49 is when Jacob gave promises to his own son. But we pick up in chapter 50, verse 15. And this was after 17 years after the reconciliation. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, this was after Jacob died, they said, Joseph will perhaps hate us and will certainly repay us all the evil which we did to him. And in verse 18, his brothers also went and fell down before his face. And they said, behold, we are your servants. And Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? And as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it to pass, as it is this day, to save a great many people alive. And now do not fear, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. Well, Joseph lived the age of 110 and he died. But after with this last scripture, I have to relate to Psalm 103, verse 12, where it says, as far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Well, Joseph once the reconciliation was made, Joseph had no grudge against his brothers, and he exercised humility. He never, once he became governor of Egypt, he never changed from the humility that he had, and showed grace, mercy, and love towards his brothers. And that is the same principle with us in the church. Our conversion was our own relatives, loved ones, friends, family. In the second resurrection, we're going to have to be very merciful to them. But it's going to be easier for us because we'll be spirit beings. Whereas Joseph you had to fight against the potential carnality. Now Joseph is in the faith chapter in Hebrews 11. Joseph remained faithful to the end of his life. And he's listed in Hebrews 11, faith chapter. In verse 22, where it says, by faith, Joseph, when he was dying, spoke of the coming exodus of the children of Israel and gave a command concerning his bones. So he knew that when the exodus was coming, bones would be carried out of Egypt in the land of Canaan. And also including in verse 39, but these all included Joseph. Though they had received a good report through faith, did not obtain the promise. So Joseph has not yet been resurrected, because in verse 40, God had determined in advance to provide something superior for us, so that without us they would not be made perfect. Well, on the sea of glass, when we're resurrected, the day of Pentecost, and we're resurrected onto the sea of glass, we will have the opportunity to meet Joseph and be able to relate more to the experiences that he had in his life. And he was a great example to us. It says in, trying to think of the scripture in 1 Corinthians, I believe it's in 1 Corinthians, these are example to us. And Joseph was an example to us. I hope this has made encouraging for you all.